Um, Michael, I just introduce you, just describe what you are going, just mention your role in HL7 in IHE, but I also mentioned that you asked me to present you as a product manager that is working with stakeholder in the field and that is facing day-by-day problem with institution and IT developer, as you said, with the feet in the mud, yeah. to try to resolve real thing.
Yeah.
So I have the pleasure to give the floor to you, and happy to learn from your experience. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Giorgio. Let me share my screen.
Let me stop to share my screen. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
No, hold on. Let me see. Okay, thank you very much, Giorgio. Grazie. It's an honor for me to present a small presentation about the Netherlands and your Congress of HL7 Italia. I've made this presentation together with my colleague Alexander Henket, but he's very busy, so he lifted up to me to tell you the story of the Netherlands and the developments of HL7. So I believe that Giorgio already told some things about this. Oh, hold on, that's going too quick. Just a short word about Nictiz. Nictiz is the National Institute for IT in Healthcare. Basically, we are funded by the Ministry of Health completely. Sometimes there are some other parties who give some subsidies, but most of our work is done on behalf of the Ministry of Health. So I think Giorgio also told about my activities within HL7 patient care and IHE pharmacy, so I'll skip that. So the topics I'm going to tell to you are about the situation in the Netherlands, just a quick overview. Important are the concepts of how we approach implementation programs. And of course, because this is an HL7 convention, we're talking about the information standards, the tools we use in the Netherlands. I'll give some examples on projects. And in the end, I will close my presentation with some takeaway messages. So Netherlands is a small country, 17 million inhabitants. But, you know, like most European countries, we have a growing population, which is growing older and older. So there are about 8.8 million patients with with chronic ailments, of which about roughly half of them have more than one chronic disease. And if you look at the group of 75 years and older, then 45% of these patients are using more than 5 medications per day. We had also a tremendous reorganization of the healthcare. So some decennia ago, we had about 100 hospitals that has been reduced into 69 general hospitals, which include the 8 university hospitals. And basically, they're becoming larger and larger. What you also see is that we have about 5,000 primary care providers, the GPs, and about 2,000 community pharmacies. To understand how we function is that you have to understand a bit of the structure of the Dutch healthcare. It's built in layers, and basically you start in the first layer, the primary care, and in the recent periods, as you see, a lot of work are shifting from hospital to the primary care. So the primary care consists here of the GPs, the general practitioners, the pharmacies, the midwife practices, and services like physiotherapy and so on. And only if the primary care cannot take care of you, then you will be referred to the secondary care, the hospitals. And if it's too complex, of course, they will send you on back to the university hospitals, for example, for specialized treatments on cancer and so on. because that's where, of course, the top knowledge of the healthcare is residing. Now, if you look at the way it's structured, is you can make a distinction between the short-term care, the cure, that's actually kind of a mass production, and the longer-term care, which involves a large part of nursing. And what you see is, of course, each is specialized on its special target. But nonetheless, of course, it happens that you have to transfer one patient from one group to the other. So you're being sent from the GP to the hospitals and so on. And then, of course, you have to collaborate with each other, because that is what one of the problems is where we fit in. So a lot of the information and a lot of these institutions are islands of information. And that causes problems in communicating with each other. And the problem is not that there are no standards. Actually, the problem is that there are too many standards. So which standard do you use, and how do you agree on which standards to use? And for that, we have a kind of a philosophy, if you would like to call that. So we have this concept of interoperability. And this concept actually explains is that if you want to make your project a success, then you have to take care of measures on 5 layers. So only if you have taken measures on these 5 layers, you will kind of guarantee that it will succeed. So it's obvious you do need an infrastructure, but of course you also need some application to register and process the information, and then you have the content. And the content, of course, are the data and information structures and the semantics. And that is supposed to support your workflow, which is described in the care process. That's the blue layer. And above that, you need agreements of how to commit all the different parties in this project. So you have the guidelines, you have the policies, you have the laws, and so on, which are supposed to support the facility and the information transformation. So this is the basic approach of how we pick up the projects. And we are especially focusing on the information level and the application level. And on the information level is what we do on the more abstract part is make agreements on what we call the ZIPs in Dutch. And the ZIPs are clinical information models. In HL7, we have the term detailed clinical models or SIMI, whatever. And these are logical models. So it says how your data is structured and how it relates to each other. And this is just an example of pregnancy. So you have agreements on the relationships, the cardinalities, but of course important also the terminologies which you use and the data types which you use. Now, these concepts you can't exchange from one system to the other without a technical standard. So that's where the HL7 standards fit in. And we use the various types of HL7 standards. The oldest, of course, the messages, the version 3 messages. We also have the clinical documents, for example, for reporting. And recently, the last 4 or 5 years, is we also have applied the FHIR messages. But besides that, you also, of course, need the content. And the content is, for a large part, based on the terminology from SNOMED. And for products like medicines, we have what you call the G standard. It's comparable with in the US, they have the RX norm. Now the G standard is actually the vocab for the pharmacy in the Netherlands. But you need more than the technical standards, because the technical standard just only describes the carriage in which you transport the information. You need something to support your standard, and you use some tools to support that. So you need proper tools, and actually this tool is called RDecor. We have built it ourselves. It was Kai Heitmann who has built it. He's a German doctor who has worked with us quite a lot in the past. Um, and this RDecor is a tool in which you can maintain your data set, the scenarios, the terminology, but also the HL7 templates. So here you see an example where you can see how the data is structured with the cardinality, and of course that's a bit covered by the text, but that's where you see which templates you use and so on. There are also other supporting tools which are built against the RDecor. So you have the ADA, which is the RDecor application. We use that to generate forms, and in the forms we fill in the data. So that can produce an XML example. What we also do with RDecor is use it as a testing platform. So because of the XML templates, of course, have schematrons, and so you can send in a message and it can validate against that schematron. And recently, for the fire messages, we use Forge, Simplifier. There's a commercial product called Touchstone for the fire platform. And the way we do it is we put in also layers here. So these SIMs, these clinical information models, they are the basic package. And above that, you can put some more constraints on that package, because basically a clinical information model is without any context. And you put the context in a scenario. So you add several layers of validation on above that basic package. So let me go through some of the projects we have. The largest project is on pharmacy. And it's actually a second generation standard which we are applying now. If you compare that with the old-fashioned prescription, is you have here the prescription, and what we have done is split the therapy and the logistic part of the information from each other. So the therapy would say that you should use amoxicillin for the coming 7 days for 2 times daily. And the logistic part is you would say that you need 1 bottle of war or 1 box of antibiotic to supply that to the patient. The way we do it is you consider that as separate building blocks. So the therapy could run longer. For example, if you have high blood pressure, your therapy would probably not change daily, but for example, once a year, you would review that and it would continue and so on. But the logistic part is you resupply the patient with a box of pills every 3 months. And what the particular thing is that you could also send in a stop message, a stop prescription to tell that the patient has to stop using that medication. Now, this is another example, which is about emergency care. And there's a lot of applications built on this platform. Important part is where we can retrieve a patient summary from the GP. Another part is sending the information from the ambulance to the emergency care department of this hospital where it's going to. And what also is very useful was a kind of portal where you could see the available capacity of resources. And these are resources like the ICU or the beds for maternity care. And especially in the time of Corona, we could see where there was still some beds available for these Corona patients, because usually in Netherlands, we have something like 700 ICU beds. But in the Corona period, it grew up to that we had a shortage and we had to maximize the amount of beds to about 1,400. We even had to send patients to Germany. But with that, you could mention, you could at least track where the patient should go to and see which hospital still had some ICU beds left. So it was very useful and probably saved some lives. On the GP front, we have a lot of smaller applications. The important one is the patient summary. It's not like the international patient summary. It's an older version of the patient summary. And we are now remodeling that patient summary as well. The diabetic care and the care for the COPD patients are also some special applications to support the care of diabetic patients or these lung patients. On birth care, we also have a large project, and there we can communicate between the midwives, the gynecologists, the pediatricians, the ultrasound centers which are involved, and the maternity care. We have a data set which contains about 500 data concepts. And in these 500 data concepts, there are also quality indicators which are collected for every pregnancy. It supports the screening on sexual transmitted diseases like HIV. We have a screening on Down syndrome and also a screening using the ultrasound to detect spina bifida. And here, what you see here is the infrastructure which is going to be used for care-to-care communications on a regional basis. It's almost like an IG configuration where you have an index and where you can retrieve the information in a viewer. In the child health, this is actually public health. It's focused on prevention. It's where the vaccination program for children is being supported. But it's not only vaccinations, it's also monitoring of eyesight, of obesitas, of the hearing problems. It's a large data set, has more than 700 data items. It's being used by the municipal institutions. And basically, it's divided into electronic health record systems. One is for the babies up to 4 years old, and the other is for the children from 5 to 17 years old. That's in production. What is also new is the introduction of the patient health records, where the focus is that the care should be patient-centered. This is using these clinical information models as data concepts of data components. And it's almost like the blue button you have in the US, where you can download the information using FHIR profiles to the PHR. And each PHR receives something like a reimbursement of $750 per patient for this starting moment. We also have a project for the care transfer. There are about 300,000 care transfers a year. Also, this is also based on these clinical information models, and it's also using FHIR as a mechanism to transfer the information from each other. Now, for all these projects, of course, you need some financing. And why is it important, and why does the government, the Ministry of Health, think this is worthwhile? In the first place, if you don't do that, then the cost of healthcare would be immensely much higher. But there's also a second problem, is that we have shortages of capacity in Netherlands. So we try to be as efficient as possible, and the information technology helps with that. So what you see is that they do invest a lot in these IT programs. These are the IT programs which have been running from 2018 up till 2023. So you see a large amount of projects. And if you would count this up, there will be something like 400 million euros, so almost $500 million, which is being invested by the government in these projects. This is only the financing for the institutions, so it's not talking about the finance of the ministry itself. So I will close down my presentation with some takeaway messages. First is I want you to remember that this 5-layer interoperability concept is important for us, and you should also look into that when you implement your projects. Actually, the layer in which we are in is this, the more easy one. The more difficult one, of course, is to get commitment from all the parties involved. So that's on the layer of the policy. And use as much as possible which has already been invented. Don't reinvent the wheel if it already exists. And what we see is sometimes is that people forget to take account of maintenance as part of your project. Because if you want to be that information standard to be viable, then you should be able to guarantee continuity, and you should have an organization which can maintain these standards, because that will only guarantee the continuity of the program. So finally, Netherlands, of course, is a land which is largely under sea level. And of course, you know these windmills, and some, I would like to pass on some Dutch wisdom, and that is that we can only live in Netherlands and have dry feet if you collaborate with each other. So you can't do it on your own. You can't have only your own windmill pumping for your part. You have to do it together. And with only that, you can have success in your projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. We have one question from Stefano Dalmiani. The question is G standard interoperable at cross-border EU level?
At this moment, no. But you know that we have the IDMP, and basically is that the IDMP will be integrated into our G standard. Okay. But that's a process which is running in the background. So the care provider will always see, of course, his own selection tables of which products to use and which to choose from. And behind the motor and the engine, you will see that it will work with the international standards. And for cross-border, we will use, of course, a national contact point. So in Netherlands, we have a national contact point, which will translate it to the foreign tables of which you communicate, for example, in Italy.
I don't know if there are other questions from the audience. It seems not. Otherwise, I have a provocative question for you, Michael. I see that you in Netherlands, you have a lot of real services and you are strongly based on standard. There are a lot of people that think that standard is a burden. Just so, what in your opinion, based on your experience, where do you think these people are right and where do you think these people are wrong? So to see the standard just as a additional burden, maybe not needed, because services can be done only by using technology solution without relying on other kind of knowledge and
yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. Of course, it is partly, if you look, you have to find agreements on all 5 layers. So partly you say it's a part of the negotiations, yes, and on that concept of the 5 layer, that's especially done on that layer of policies, because you could have agreed, okay, we won't use for example, you don't use SNOMED, but you would use ICD. That's a choice, and you have to negotiate on that. That's true, but you always have to look, of course, is what the commitment is for that standard in all layers of that of the field which you're active in, and that is where governments can help. Because as I was saying, is you should not reinvent the wheel if you can have a wheel which you can just apply for your standards. People have thought about it, and we have benefit also a lot on what is available on FHIR, but also what is available on XML. And you can see that in the last program we have on vaccinations, is we look at each other, we look at what one country has and see if we can also reuse that. So you know, you can stick on your own island if you want, but you won't be able to get across the island. You won't be able to build bridges.
Thank you, Michael. There is another question: is do you have XDS implementation, and are you planning to convert in Fire?
Yes, we have XDS implementations, mostly on images. What we are trying, I gave the example of the birth care, is actually we're also looking at XDS implementation for that birth care. But actually, is what you also see is a shift to the Fire paradigm. So people are saying, well, you know, is it still worthwhile? And I think, for example, for the large images, it's still worthwhile to have the XDS and the registry and so on to find where your information is residing. But what you see now is also a discussion whether the REST paradigm could be more helpful to implement new methods of querying information.
Okay, thank you so much. If there are no other questions, I would say thank you again.
Okay.